a sound there. It's a feeling. It's a different type of feeling that comes forth from people who have been singers in the church.
I say it's all right.
The tone for black music of the 1960s was set by Ray Charles. His 1954 recording of I've Got a Woman broke new ground as a celebration of music from the church, but with lyrics of love and romance.
I've got a woman way over town, good to me. Yes, I have. I've got a woman way over town, good to me. I know.
This secularized gospel sound appealed to blacks and whites alike and would become the backbone of black music for the next decade and a half. From the polished dance music of Motown to the raw emotion of Southern soul.
Now don't you send me no doctor, filling me up with all of those pills. All we need is music, sweet music. There'll be music everywhere. There'll be swinging, swaying, and records playing, dancing in the street.
You know I feel all right. Feel pretty good, y'all. We used to call it cornbread. Cornbread singer, you know, you get that, that's strength, you know what I mean? And this carried us through the era of the R&B era, because it actually was what we learned in church. Long tall Sally, twisting with Lucy, doing the what to say.
When we did I Got a Woman, that's where it all started from. You know, because a lot of people said, "Oh, that's a religious song. And you just change the words around and this and that." So and so you're being sacrilegious and you're being this and you're being that and you know. And my answer to that was, at this point, since I've given up trying to sound like Nat Cole, I'm gonna be what I am, and I don't give a damn who like it and who don't.
Sam Cooke liked it. In 1957, the 26-year-old Cooke abandoned a successful career with the gospel soul stirrers and made the leap to the more lucrative world of pop.
Send me, I know you send me, I know you send me, honest you do.
The adults, none of them liked the idea. Sam Cooke, who was one of their idols when he was with the Soul Stirrers, singing pop music. I mean, like my grandmother and her friends and the whole neighborhood was like, I remember hearing conversations how bad they thought that it was, because the young people thought it was great.
At first I thought it was infatuation, but ooh, it's lasted.
You Send Me was a crossover sensation, reaching #1 and selling nearly 2 million singles. Sam Cooke's artistic and commercial success inspired scores of young African Americans, including one who would soon become the most powerful force in black music, the founder of Motown Records, Berry Gordy Jr. of Detroit. Gordy had dropped out of high school in 1945 and spent the next 5 years seeking his fortune as a professional boxer and hanging out around Detroit's jazz clubs.
We had the greatest show in the city, and cars would be lined up from one end of John R. to the other, and you had all them big Cadillacs and stuff going up there. It was a grand old age. Well, during this time, Berry Gordy was in the back door. He'd be standing back there looking in because he's too young to come in.
Gordy came of age living on Detroit's east side. His love for jazz persisted, although the blues and R&B were far more popular in the neighborhood.
In my neighborhood, jazz was not popular at all. But I had just come out of the Army, and it had been very much a part of my life before I went into the Army and all that, and I was really into it. So when I came out, first thing I wanted to do was go into business and open up a jazz record store, which is what I did. But the people in my neighborhood, they had other ideas. I mean, they wanted Muddy Waters and B.B. King and Fats Domino. I stocked up in blues records, and people came back to buy it, and but it was too late. It was too late to save my store, but it was not too late for me to realize the emotions of people and the simplicity that they love to hear, and which was always in me all the time.
Lonely teardrops, my blood never dry.
Lonely Teardrops was written by Berry Gordy and Billy Davis in 1958. The failure of his jazz record store convinced Gordy to stick with music that was simple and direct. And Lonely Teardrops was a smash, reaching number 1 on the R&B chart and crossing over to the white pop chart.
It was very important to make sure it had crossover potential. It had to have a sound that wasn't threatening to the general audience or the pop disc jockeys, the program directors, threatening anything that was too funky, too bluesy was a little bit threatening. No, that's not for our audience. This would be the spill that you would get. So it was okay for it to have a rhythm and a beat, as long as you didn't get too funky with it.
The best things in life are free, but you can give them to the birds and bees. I see
Early in 1959, with several crossover hits to his credit, Gordy borrowed $800 from his family and launched what would become the Motown empire. At a time when America's civil rights movement was in its infancy and black ownership virtually unknown in the music business, Gordy boldly labeled his building Hitsville, USA. And within 2 years, he had the number 2 pop hit in the country.
My mama told me, you better shop around. Oh yeah, you better shop around. Shop around.
It was on the market playing in Detroit on the radio stations. Berry Gordy decided that the rhythm was not, the beat was not proper. He just needed a little bit of a change. He called us about 3 o'clock in the morning and said, I want all you guys to come back to the studio.
Smokey got up and got the rest of the group over to the studio, and we did it. And he said, well, what's wrong? He still didn't know what's wrong. And I said, the tempo is too slow. He said, but we all liked it before. And I said, I don't care about before, but it's just too slow. We've got to perk it up. The piano player didn't show up, and so I ended up playing the piano, and it turned out to be our first million seller.
Oh yes, wait a minute, Mr. Postman. Wait, hey.
Gordy's first number 1 record came from another local group, fresh from high school, the Marvelettes.
Oh yeah.
And their album cover pictured a cartoon mailbox, since many record stores would not display albums that showed black faces.
Oh yeah.
Motown's roster soon included 18-year-old Mary Wells, often backed by a young male group called the Temptations.
Well, I've got 2 lovers and I ain't ashamed. 2 lovers and I love them both the same.
Do you love me? I can really move. Do you love me? I'm in the groove. Do you love me?
The Contours, who would have one big hit but were too rough-edged to meet Gordy's crossover requirements. Marvin Gaye, son of a Pentecostal minister and soon to marry Berry Gordy's sister, Anna.
I try to put my arms around you, all because I wanna hold you tight.
Clap your hands just a little bit louder. Clap your hands just a little bit louder.
12-year-old blind Steveland Morris, soon rechristened Little Stevie Wonder. And Motown secretary Martha Reeves, who began to record with 2 backup singers, as Martha and the Vandellas.
Here's your old friendship ring. I can't wait no more.
It's amazing how fast Motown grew. I was only a secretary there for 9 months. But at the end of that 9 months, everybody was famous. Everybody had a record out, and I never looked back. I gave my job to 3 girls from Secretarial College.
Oh, it's wonderful. I believe he's wonderful. So wonderful.
The first hit for Martha and the Vandellas was written by 3 young Detroiters who grew up steeped in gospel music. Brothers Eddie and Brian Holland teamed with Lamont Dozier to write over 24 top 10 songs during the mid-60s.
That's our favorite song right there. It took me a while to write songs. I couldn't do them real quick. It would take me some time to sort of juggle each word around and this word around, mostly to go for the feeling of it, you know. Not necessarily the rhyming, the feeling, you know, where you could feel it, where you could walk away and it would be sort of a haunting feeling, you know. And my concept was always basically, if you missed 30% or 50% of the lyric, you would still know what the song was about.
Here's your old friendship ring.
Simple, memorable lyrics had been a Berry Gordy trademark since his early days with Billy Davis. Another was a strong, irresistible drum beat that anybody could dance to.
At that time, the rhythm was usually buried on a record. You didn't hear it. Just a small pulse, you'd feel it. But when Holland Dozier Holland came on the scene, it became rhythm out front. They had stomping boards. They'd take a board and put on some 2x4 and stand on it and stomp. They'd shake chains and scratch on the wall. They did all kind of sounds and rhythm, man. They were just creative. Anything that sounded pretty decent, they'd do.
The Motown sound would never have happened had the musicians not been the skillful guys that they were and the tasty jazz musicians that they were, because they allowed us to be heard. They played special things where you could fit your vocals in just like they fitted their music together. That's the reason for the real grooves that we had and still maintain in our music, because of the Funk Brothers.
Funk Brothers was the nickname for the Motown studio band. Berry Gordy had met most of them in Detroit's jazz clubs in the 50s, and their polished musicianship gave a solid foundation to the records made by Motown's young writers and producers.
They were not only excellent musicians, but they could read. So therefore, just imagine, okay, if you're dealing with some young producers who really don't read music, and if they dealt with people that were playing by ear and couldn't read music, it would have been a disaster. They could play anything, and whatever we asked them to do, they could do. Especially Jamerson, he could play the most complex lines with that bass. That really added a lot. And Earl Van Dyke, the drummer Benny Benjamin, who I loved dearly because he could keep a beat so like a metronome, and I love working with those guys. Anytime I can call all those guys together, I was just happy to do it.
Motown producers used the Funk Brothers whenever possible to give their records a leg up on the competition, and the hottest competition often came not from the Beatles or the Beach Boys, but from just down the hall.
The real competition was within the Motown. The Norman Whitfields, the Smokey Robinsons, the Ivy Joe Hunters, and Mickey Stevenson. That was the real competition, because you felt if you did not come up with that follow-up, somebody would be there, oh, the guys missed this time. Let's rush in and cut this. I think we got them. It was that type of thing. So that was really the only true competition that you were really aware of or felt.
All Motown's producers were trying to score with the Temptations, who were still hitless after 8 tries. Early in 1964, Smokey Robinson brought in the song that would make the Temptations his group to produce for the next 2 years.
sits down at the piano and he passed the lyrics around, and I'm reading the lyrics and I said, what? You got a smile so bright, you know you could have been a candle. I said, that's hokey. But the more I looked, at it, and we started putting the harmony together, I said, this is some pretty clever stuff, even though it was very simple, but it had a nice, unique thing about it. And once we put the voices together and rehearsed it and went in the studio and we heard the track and we put it all together, that was the one.
Well, you could have been anything that you wanted to, and I can tell the way you do the things I do.
Whoever had the hit on the last artist would get the first shot on that same artist again. And so some people had locks on artists, like Smokey had a lock early on Mary Wells, and he also had a lock on the Temptations after The Way You Do the Things You Do. And it wasn't until he did a song called Get Ready that didn't make it that big that Nolan Whitfield got a shot. And he then came up with a record called Ain't Too Proud to Beg, and it just blew Smokey out of the water. So that's the kind of competition, and everybody was fair game.
Several producers, including Gordy himself, had recorded a young trio from Detroit's Brewster Projects, but the group remained hitless for 3 years, until Holland Dozier Holland finally struck pay dirt.
We had watched people come into Motown, be signed, and get a hit record and go on. And we were the first female group there. So anyway, when Eddie brought us this song, it was to be our, I think, 12th release, something like that. I heard the song, we heard the song, and at that time I was kind of more or less the spokesperson. I spoke up, And I said, Eddie, we want a hit. This song is not a hit. And I said, it's nothing. It's like, baby, baby, where did our love go? Baby, baby. I said, it's nothing. I said, look at Martha and the Vandellas. We want a hit like theirs. We want a soulful record. And he said, Mary, trust me, this is going to be a hit. I started crying. I was begging the guy, please give us a hit. This is how desperate we had become.
In only 3 years, Berry Gordy's acts had garnered over a dozen top 10 pop hits and were poised to enter the upper echelons of show business, where few black artists had been welcome. But along the way, Motown acts had played their share of primarily black venues, the Chitlin Circuit, from rickety dance halls in Alabama to New York's Apollo Theater.
Now you've gone from me and left behind so many memories. Hey, baby, come and get your memories over.
The Motown review, the very first one, was 94 one-nighters. That's 3 months of living on a bus. Out of those 94 one-nighters, we had about 3 hotel stays. So it was actually sitting on that crowded bus with a 12-piece band and 8 or 9 acts.
That was also in the days of the Freedom Riders. And when they see this bus, we came to get gas. And as we stepped out of the bus to go to the Johns, we looked down the street, and all the little houses along the street had people standing in the doorway. And behind the door was a shotgun.
There were a lot of restaurants that we went in where we had to actually go in the back door and have cold hot chocolate and cold hot dogs. And that's all that we were served.
I remember one place in Texas specifically that we went to the back, and we had to wend our way through the garbage cans to a little window about the size of, I guess about that size. And man, they would put our plates paper plates through the window, and we ate on those garbage cans.
Oh yes, wait a minute, Mr. Postman. Wait, Mr. Postman. Mr. Postman. Oh yeah.
Before any of the tours really were established, Georgiana from the Marvelettes walked out on the stage. They said, "Now the Marvelettes," and she walked out on the stage with her eyes wide and chewing gum, and looking at all the people and said, just country style. And I said, it's not going to work. We got to have a department that would groom the kids. And since most of them were ghetto kids that came from single parent homes, and didn't have all the cultural tactics that's needed, we decided to give it to them.
They asked me to open up the finishing school there, Motown Finishing School. Of course, the youngsters, they came from humble beginning, and some were rude and crude and from the street and the project. But with me, it isn't where you come from, it's where you're going.
She taught us how to be elegant, and that's what we wanted. It wasn't something, we weren't being taught something that we didn't want. We wanted to be better. We wanted to, aspire to be the best. She'll say, now ladies. Golly, we used to hate her then.
She was the brunt of a lot of jokes, I'll say that, because as young girls, we didn't take her seriously. But I did in my heart, and I applied everything she taught me. And I can't really do anything now without thinking of Mrs. Powell. If I sit, if I talk, if I walk, if I carry myself at all, Miss Powell is there.
Marvin Gaye said to me one day, Miss Powell, he called the finishing school a charm school. Miss Powell, I don't think I need a charm school, and I don't think I need any training. I said, Marvin, you don't need as much as some of the other artists, but you do sing with your eyes closed.
I'm a stubborn kind of fella, got my mind made up to love you.
And it gives the illusion that you're singing in your sleep. And number one, places around the country, you have to have your eyes open. Then we could improve on your walk because you're leading with your shoulders and your head. Everything had to be done in a classy way. So if they were doing the shake or whatever, well, we didn't do it in a vulgar way. With Diana Ross and the Supremes, we worked on singing and expressing yourself, looking pleasant and with a smile and maybe a gesture, and how to handle a mic, you see, so that the mic don't handle you. I don't want you ever to look forward, lean forward. You do not protrude the buttocks.
Berry Gordy also hired a well-respected choreographer, Charlie Atkins, to fine-tune Motown stage shows and prepare the acts for television and upscale nightclubs.
In many cases, the artists just went out and they sang and they danced and they jumped around, and they wasn't accustomed to having to be concerned about projection and physical drama. You had to add a lot of movement that would be attractive to the ladies, and the ladies had to do movements that would attract the men.
I've been crying, cause I'm lonely.
Sometimes when I was working with the Supremes on that movement, Mary used to say to me, "You're trying to teach me how to look ladylike," which is exactly what I was doing, because I was giving them moves like very feminine moves where you use your shoulders, wave your hands, and all this kind of business, and keep you so that the fellas are going to really notice what you're putting down.
We would go into artist development at Motown and work on a song, and it would take hours, and we put in hours every day learning those routines. People have often said that Motown kind of made us over and made us into these sophisticated little dolls, but I think that's something that we brought within ourselves. And so Charlie was able to keep us the way we were, but still keep that sophistication and to keep it sexy and to keep the rock and roll, all that as one unit.
Charlie really started turning up the heat on as far as polishing us and spending more time in artist development, because it got to the point that we would be there so much that, man, we were getting tired of looking at each other, but it was worth it because they were grooming us for the real big stage, the Copacabanas, the Las Vegas, the Atlantic Cities, and what have you.
Sometimes we would find that a move might be quite primitive, something that you would see just on the R&B circuit. It would go something like this here. So what we would do for the presentation and the crossover is try to bring it up and give it a little bit more sophistication. It would look something like this here.
Before the 60s were out, the Temptations and several other Motown acts were playing Las Vegas, the Ed Sullivan Show, and the country's most exclusive nightclubs.
You do me wrong, but still I'm crazy about you. Stay away too long, I can't do without you.
Gordy's goal of producing a non-stop stream of sophisticated pop entertainers had become a reality, culminating in the launching of a superstar that Motown developed nearly from the cradle, Michael Jackson of the Jackson 5. For many, Motown's success was Black America's success, a musical accompaniment to the quest for equality led by Dr. Martin Luther King. But to others, Motown was losing its soul by polishing its music and artists for white audiences. The real soulful music was coming from down south.
Temptations did, what the Four Tops did, what Diana Ross and the Supremes did. All of those were top records across the world. But they were da 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 da. But the minute you crossed the Mason and Dixon line and got down here in Memphis, altogether different.
See, you would hear songs at Motown that had the influence of the church in the melody, but they would polish it, and they did a marvelous job at doing that. At Stax, we didn't. We just let it all hang out. We went for it, and whatever it was, that's what it was. Whatever you felt, that's what it was.
Stax Records began in 1958, taking its name from founder Jim Stewart and his sister Estelle Axton. And by 1960, a modest hit by local legend Rufus Thomas and his daughter Carla convinced Stewart to produce more black music. And Stax soon caught the ear of rhythm and blues kingpin Jerry Wexler of Atlantic Records.
It really turned me on to watch the way they recorded, because it was entirely different from what we had been doing in New York and from what everybody else was doing around the country, which was recording with written arrangements, arrangers, and studio players who read the charts.
You didn't have to prepare music. You played a song for them once. The artist could sit down and play or sing them the song once. They learned the song. No music in front of them telling them go from here to there to there. They learned the song. And they had this intimate relationship with each other, where if after they listen to the song once, they say, you take the first verse, you do the fills here, I'll stay out, then you can. About 2 or 3 takes, they learned the song faster than you were prepared to record it.
One of the keys to the spontaneity of Stax recordings was its tight rhythm section, Booker T and the MGs. Younger than Motown's Funk Brothers, they grew up listening to rhythm and blues and rock and roll.
Duck and I, we grew up in a great school called Messick. It was a segregated school, but the only thing we wanted to listen to was Hank Ballard and the Midnighters and Little Richard and Chuck Berry and Platters, and that's all we wanted to dance to, you know, all those great old songs and stuff. It wasn't until really later, after we had graduated from high school, we first met Booker T.
Booker T. Jones hung out in the record shop near the studio and played saxophone and then organ on Stax sessions. And despite the fact that Memphis of the early 60s was very much a segregated city, the Stax studio band was built around the interracial quartet of Cropper, Dunn, drummer Al Jackson Jr., now deceased, and Booker T. Jones.
We just looked away from the fact that it had never been done before, and we just did it. We played the black clubs, and we played the white clubs, and we stayed in white hotels, we stayed in black hotels, we ate in white restaurants and black restaurants, and we broke the rules.
During the 1960s, the MGs, along with the Stax horn section and the writer-producer team of Isaac Hayes and David Porter, powered a host of artists, including Sam and Dave, Otis Redding, and a singer Jerry Wexler was producing, whose career seemed stalled in New York.
Sail away, I ain't got long to stay. I said I ain't got long to stay.
Wilson Pickett sang on a lot of gospel stuff. And one of the things, when he would get into his sort of sanctified groove on the end, you know, he would go, oh, I want to wait till the midnight hour, see my Jesus in the midnight hour, and that kind of stuff, you know. So it's kind of an ID for this guy, you know.
I would always put that in somewhere in the song, in the midnight hour, in the gospel song. I may meet Jesus, it may be soon in the morning, or it may be in the midnight hour, you see. So that midnight hour thing was kicking around all the time, this there.
That's when my love comes tumbling down.
Steve Cropper and Wilson Pickett wrote In the Midnight Hour in the Lorraine Motel down the street from Stax during Pickett's first night in town. And the next morning at the recording session, Wexler assured the record's success when he showed the musicians a new dance he'd seen up north.
There was a dance in New York that we didn't know anything about in Memphis called the jerk. And so when, you know, if you remember that dance song, we was cutting in the midnight hour, and he came out and he said, well, can you put it in this jerk dance thing? That's how kind of how that delayed two came about.
Wexler he was unhappy about something. He said, hey baby, can you just put it here, baby? Kink, put it here, baby. Hey, put it right, kink. I didn't know, what the hell is this man talking about?
Al and I just started kind of going with him and just kind of laying back, and I just started playing these backbeats, and it probably was one of the most influential sounds that we had, because we started cutting a lot of records after Midnight Hour hit with what we call a delayed backbeat.
Wilson Pickett's deep gospel roots, paired with 1965's dance craze, landed Midnight Hour on the pop charts and paved the way for the even churchier sound of Otis Redding to cross over. Redding had been working as a chauffeur and occasional vocalist for Johnny Jenkins and the Pine Toppers when they recorded at Stax in the fall of 1962.
We walked over to the organ and he started singing These Arms of Mine, and I was just really moved by the way he sang it, and I was just mostly listening rather than playing. And I felt the same way the first time I played with him as it did the last time I played with him. The last time I played with him, we were doing Dock of the Bay, and it was always the same with Otis. He always moved me. He sang.
Otis Redding came in. And when he came in, it changed. It changed the lyrics and the way that he presented his version of his music, now he wanted it to go, which turned out to be not gravelly like mine and not rhythm and blues like the others. So that's how soul, I feel like, was slowly gotten into.
In the spring of 1967, as much of rock and roll was being transformed by the emerging hippie culture, the music rooted in the churches of Black America took Europe by storm.
We sold out every place we went. We broke all attendance records. You know, we didn't go into, at that time it was the stadiums, but we were playing the small venues, and we were packing them out because they had never, you know, did that gospel thing.
If you know what I'm talking about, do me a favor before I go. Do me a favor before I go. Do me a favor. Will you do me a favor? Do me a favor. Do me a favor. Do me a favor. Do me a favor.
To get an audience that involved, to tell them to stand up, do me a favor and get up. At first you saw the reluctant, like, they weren't really sure, you know, and this guy started going to say, get up, he just kept, it's like hypnotizing. We weren't dancers, you know, we would just stand up there shaking it and doing the holy dance. That's something I got out of church.
I was apprehensive, very leery of exposing Otis Redding to the thousands of flower children. And here were the Jefferson Airplane that looked like they were playing with 20-foot Marshall amps, and the Grateful Dead doing their long boogies. And here comes Booker T and the MGs, and they've got their little Sears Roebuck amps and this tiny sound.
Thank you so much. All right, now.
Well, I don't think we really knew what to expect until we got there. And that was a bit of a shock treatment.
What was it? I mean, we're out there in our green mohair suits, you know, and we thought it was a job, you know, and then everybody's out there in these flowers, you know, the flowers around, you know, and all these flower shirts. And I said, holy George, I said, the world's coming to an end.
This is the love crowd, right? We all love each other, don't we? Am I right? Let me hear you say yeah, man!
Otis Redding crossed over in Monterey. Wexler's apprehensions about the flower children proved unfounded. Redding's version of deep Southern soul touched a nerve in these white kids, and soul music blossomed on the charts alongside Motown and the new psychedelic bands. 150 miles southeast of Memphis, along the Tennessee River, are the 4 small towns of Florence, Tuscumbia, Sheffield, and Muscle Shoals, Alabama. From this spot, deep in the Bible Belt and a stronghold of the Ku Klux Klan, came many other defining records of the soul music era. From a studio called Fame, run by former country fiddle player and songwriter Rick Hall.
It was tough. You got to remember, this was in the 60s. And this was when George Wallace was standing in the schoolhouse door at the University of Alabama. It's when the National Guard came to Arkansas. These are tough times, and they didn't, black people I had no problem with. If I had a problem with anybody, it was white people who didn't like me socializing or recording black music in Alabama with this all going on.
When a Man Loves a Woman by Percy Sledge brought the sound of Muscle Shoals to the attention of Jerry Wexler, who was looking for a new southern studio after a falling out with Stax. And in 1966, he sent Wilson Pickett down to Alabama to meet Rick Hall.
I gets off the plane, Southern Airlines, and here this long, tall white man, we call him Peckerwoods, you know, back in. He walked up like he'd known me for 500 years. Hey, Wilson, come on, we're going to cut some funky records. Boy, we're going to really cut some records. Come on, Wilson, come on. I said, wait, I'm nervous, you know what I mean? Now, what does white man know about producing a Wilson Pickett? Well, I'm telling you, I'm going to show you the studio. I'm going to show you. Well, we went through the cotton patch. People still picking cotton. Out there, I said, is that what I see what I think it is? Yeah, Wilson, they're still picking cotton down there. We still picking cotton. This studio was right over. You could see a studio from the cotton patch. 1, 2, 3. And I have to tell you this. We cut Mustang Sally, all that funky Broadway, the land of 1,000 whole dances.
These players in Muscle Shoals were all Caucasians. Now this seems to confound perceived wisdom and all the logic of the music professors and the commentators. How could authentic soul music and blues come out of a situation like this?
We get accused of being country fans. Now, I don't know, Spooner might have been into it a little bit, but I think David and I basically came from listening to Jimmy Reed and Bo Diddley and Chuck Berry. And that's what, my first inspiration to play guitar is when I heard a local guy play Johnny B. Good. And I said, I got to learn how to do that, you know. And that's how it all started for me. It was an inspirational moment. Jerry Lee Lewis, when he came around, you know, through the airways, whole lot of shaking and that sort of thing, that was one form. And of course the Ray Charles on the other side, the rhythm and blues side, that was wonderful for me to hear. And then there was a Grand Ole Opry, you know. All those things were coming at me at once, so I took it all in.
In January 1967, the homespun studio band in Muscle Shoals, Alabama, aided in the birth of a superstar, when Jerry Wexler brought in an artist newly signed to Atlantic.
I didn't know who Aretha was. The only thing I knew was that her father was the Reverend Franklin, who I listened to at WLAC in Nashville, coming home from gigs a lot of nights.
You are to me. If you anticipate failure, believe me, you're going to fail.
I knew it was his daughter, and she'd been a secret almost in the music business. She'd never had, I don't think, even a mediocre hit at the time with CBS. They didn't know what to do with her.
When you went and left me there crying, your goodbye was even colder than
CBS Records produced Aretha singing easy jazz and pop, moving her away from the gospel music she had grown up with in her father's church. But when Jerry Wexler picked up Aretha's contract, he immediately brought her to Muscle Shoals, hoping for an environment where she could bring her natural gospel gifts to the music.
I recall we started recording, I think, 10, 11 o'clock, which we usually did. And the studio was full of musicians. We had them three deep out in the lobby. meaning that if the bass player, we had 3 bass players, if one couldn't cop the lick, we'd bring in another one and fire him. That's how important the sessions were. When Aretha came in and sat down at the piano, Spooner Oldham was playing electric piano, Wurlitzer. And I've always thought, and I think Aretha would agree to this, that his little part that he was playing was so important to the record that everybody just kind of fell into his groove.
When we played that song, in my mind I thought, well, it doesn't have a specific meter really. So the band just sort of looked at each other after it's finished, like, well, what do we do? I mean, where do we go now? So we were just all basically off in our little worlds trying to figure a rhythm or riff. And I just happened to be the one that, I guess, formulated this little pattern, and it started.
You're no good, heartbreaker. You're a liar and you're a cheat. And I don't know why I let you do these things to me.
Everybody was a little uptight, including myself. I was a nervous wreck because Alexa was standing over my shoulder always when I'm engineering. I believe Tom was here, Tom Dowd, sitting over there someplace, and between the two of them and the directions I were getting, I was, no, turn him down. Wait a minute, you're losing the singer. Bring up the horn. The guitar's wiping everything out, and we didn't have sliders in those days. We had turn pots, you turned them up and down. So it was an exciting, very exciting time.
There was a ruckus. One of the horn players and Aretha's then husband, Ted White, got into it. They'd been drinking from the same jug, and now this real, camaraderie and great palship turned into some kind of alcoholic hostility. Well, the session blew up, and instead of staying there for a week to complete the whole album, everybody went back where they came from. Ted and Aretha went to Detroit, I went to New York. I had this wonderful record. It was finished, and I Never Loved a Man. And I had a 3-piece track on the B-side called Do Right Woman. We cut the acetates on I Never Loved a Man and sent it out to the disc jockeys, and it was a tidal wave response. And our distributors and the store said, let's have the record. No record. We had no B-side. And it took me quite a while, a couple of weeks, to find Aretha. Well, we found her. She came to New York with her sisters. She and her sisters finished this record with no other help.
One day, do right, woman. Mama, you gotta be a do-right, man.
When it was finally released in the spring of 1967, I Never Loved a Man, backed with Do Right Woman, exploded to the top of the charts. The decade that began with Berry Gordy carefully polishing songs and performers to conform to white middle-class tastes had reached a point where music with deep African-American roots was being embraced the world over.
It looked as though soul was now the imprint, was now the rubric forever. But I had a hunch, and I even told my partner, I think it was maybe 68 or 69, I said, I have a feeling this is going to grind to a shuddering halt. I felt new things happening. One thing is what you call the rising aspirations of the inner city, that they were looking toward other things than this kind of so-called religious church-based music. There was a new spirit. It was more secular. But of course, the thing that really seemed to cap it was the assassination of Dr. King.
When we got the news, we were in the recording studio here recording I don't recall what song we were doing, but the whole mood and the whole atmosphere in the studio suddenly changed, and the session went downhill, and we called off the session, in fact, out of respect to him and everything. But and I'm not sure that the mood of black music didn't change along with that night.
From that point on, the rhythm and blues acts slowly stopped coming to work with us after that night. I do remember that, and it was a sad occasion in a lot of respects for us.
There was a different attitude. The dreamer had died, and many of us who had lived that, we really wondered if the dream had died with the dreamer. So some of that was reflected, or a good deal of that was reflected in our attitudes, and of course that was reflected in how the songs were written, and how we sang the songs, and how we related to each other.
Going to Stax was like going to church for me every day. Absolutely. I couldn't wait to get up in the morning and get back there. I used to work 15, 16 hours a day at Stax. But somehow after that happened, it all kind of changed. Everybody was a little more serious about life and things, and particular about stuff.
Because when the wind and the wind drill right now, but all we need is you, Jesus, to linger right there.
The death of Martin Luther King was the most dramatic in a series of turning points for black music in America. Otis Redding had died in a plane crash at the end of 1967. Race riots tore apart Detroit, and Berry Gordy gradually moved his operation to Hollywood. In the fall of 1968, James Brown's "Say It Loud, I'm Black and I'm Proud" seemed to signal the decline of gospel-based melodic music and the rise in popularity of more aggressively rhythmic black music known as funk. For many black artists, crossing over had become less important than making a statement of identity and independence.
Tomorrow on Rock and Roll, England gets the blues.
The only music that appealed to me at all was black rhythm and blues.
While musicians everywhere start to turn on.
Psychedelic music is music that expands your awareness, your consciousness.
The Yardbirds, Cream, Hendrix, and the Dead. Tomorrow on Rock and Roll.
Now, we done made a chance to do things by ourselves. We're tired of beating our heads against the wall and working for someone else. Look here, there's one more thing I got to say right here. Now we're people, we like the birds and the bees. We'd rather die on our feet, keep living on our knees. Say it loud. Say it loud. Say it loud. Lord, Lord, Lord. Say it loud. All right now. Lord, you know we can do the blues. Now we can sing the funky part. Now we do. Sometimes we dance, we sing and we talk.
A production of WGBH, Boston. Funding for Rock and Roll is provided by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting. The annual financial support of viewers like you. The Experience Music Project, a celebration of creativity and innovation through American popular music and culture, opening in Seattle in 1998. The National Endowment for the Arts.
Radio Shack, official sponsor of the house that rock built, the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame and Museum in Cleveland, Ohio.
And by the Boston Beer Company, brewers of Samuel Adams. Do you love beer?
Educators and educational institutions can purchase the Rock and Roll series on video cassette. To order, call 1-800-255-9424.
This is PBS.